Hi, Sophie Lund here, and today we're going to be talking about angle grinders. Now, angle grinders can be used, we use them most often for metalworking practices, but you could also use them for woodworking as well. Because of that, it's a really versatile tool. So it can cut things, it can grind things, it can even sand things, or it can even take paint off of material. So if you're prepping work for a welding project and you need to take paint off of it, like if it's scrap metal or something, you can have a particular attachment on an angle grinder and that'll get it nice and prepped for you. So before we get into sort of the basics of angle grinders, we want to talk about basic safety equipment. So whenever you're using an angle grinder, you always want to have, just like everything else, you want to have your safety glasses and ear protection, whether that's plugs or ear muffs. These are particularly loud machines, so you do want to have some sort of ear protection going on. You might even want to wear a face shield, depending, like if you're working with a grinding disc, and you'll get a lot of extra material coming off of the metal or off of the cutter head itself. So you might even want to wear a face shield, and I would recommend also wearing some kind of welding jacket, or at least long sleeves, long pants, and preferably boots, if not just any kind of closed-toed shoes. Because you are going to be working with some sparks, so sparks can get into shoes and could possibly burn your feet. So we don't want that to happen. So any kind of like leather equipment would be good. And again, like some sort of like welding jacket is preferable too. So you're not burning your clothes, which I've done on multiple occasions. Okay, so that's just covering basic safety equipment. So now we'll talk about the different angle grinders you might come across. So these four are all the same size. So they take 4.5 to 5 inch discs, and I'll talk about the different discs in just a second. So this is sort of just your standard size here. And this is a Milwaukee brand one. I've had this one for a number of years now. So what's nice about this is that it has a handle on it, and depending on if you're right or left-handed, you can switch the handle to either side, so it can adapt for that here. So you just unscrew it, right, and then just switch it over to the other side. This one's got a particular trigger where you have to, and it's a safety trigger, so you have to hold this top button in and then push the handle in order to start it. So if you just try to push this handle in, it won't start on its own. And that's really because if you like lay this on a table, you don't want that trigger to accidentally start up on your or whatever surface you're working on. So that safety trigger's to help keep you safe. Go figure, right? So that's that model. Most of our shops here have these DeWalt style ones. This one doesn't really have a safety trigger on it, but it does have a locking mechanism in it. So you have to really push this one up and then set it in so that it stays in place. So it'll actually keep running, so you're not having to hold the button down the entire time, which is kind of nice. The nice thing about it is that it is on the side here, so you're not going to run the risk of laying it on a table, and you have to push it up in order to engage it. So you don't have to worry about it starting up on the table. So this particular model doesn't necessarily need any kind of safety trigger on it. This one, also a DeWalt, this one has a safety trigger on it, and it's just slightly different from one of the other ones. So here it has a tab in the middle of the trigger. So in order to engage it, you have to pull that tab down and then press the trigger in. All right, so similar concept, right? So it helps it to not engage while it's sitting alone on a table. All right, and this one has a similar one to that first DeWalt where you just push this trigger up and in. This is a Metabo brand. I've had this one for quite a while too. So we got big honker over here. Ugh. So if you're doing a really big job, this will take a 7-inch disc, so this is a little bit scary. And if you're feeling strong that day, you can use this one. And this one just has like a regular trigger down here. And a much longer handle, so it'll give you a little bit more leverage if you're not trying to be a strong man right over your work. Even just picking it up, it's heavy. So if you're really, like if you're working on a construction site, you have to hog off a bunch of material off of something, that would be your go-to angle grinder. But for more often than not, you'll probably be sticking to sort of these sizes here. You might also notice that these have different cutter heads on them, so I'll go in and talk a little bit about those. So what we have here is a varied assortment of different cutter heads or finishing heads. So I'll talk about this one first. So this one's a little bit warm, but this is a sanding disc here. And this is a ceramic resin sanding disc. So the idea behind it is that you start off with a low grit, and this is a 36 grit. And as you keep using it, it'll sort of go up to higher grits, like all the way up to like a 60 grit or something. So it's sort of a nice tool in that respect because it'll initially hog off a bunch of material, but then it'll also give you a nice smooth finish once it starts to get worn out. The brand new one looks like that one right there. So when they start to reach the end of the line right here, then they're you just chuck them out. But you could buy these simply for like maybe $1 a piece if you buy like in a 25 pack. And these come in all sorts of different grits too, so you don't have to start with the 36 grit. You can go as low as a 24 grit, and then it can go all the way to like a 60, 80, or even a 120 grit I've seen. So these are really nice. And again, this is a ceramic resin one. So essentially it just like kind of sharpens itself or something like that. Here we have a flap disc. So here it's basically just small pieces of like rectangular pieces of sandpaper sort of overlapped and bonded to this backing here. So it's along the same lines as the sanding disc here, but this is more of a finishing tool rather than something that you hog off material with. So this is actually a 60 grit one. These go all the way up to a 120 grit for sure. So these are really for, you can hog off material with it, but it's really more just to get the grinding marks that these leave out with this guy, if that makes any sense. So that's that. Here we have a grinding disc here, and I'll talk about the cutoff disc too, because they're made of more or less the same material. So they're both carbide, so it's the same material that you would find on a metal cutting chop saw. And this one, because it's much thinner, we call this a cutoff disc. So this is great for cutting material down if you don't have access to a chop saw or a metal bandsaw. And here we just have a grinding disc. So see, it's much thicker. This is about like maybe 3/16 to a 1/4 inch thick. And you can hog off a lot of material with this guy. That's what this one had on here. And this one's seen some better days, but brand new, they should be nice and pretty like that. So this will hog off a bunch of material. And you might notice on this one, it has sort of like this mesh pattern into it. So that carbide is actually embedded into this mesh material, and that sort of keeps it together so it doesn't explode in your face. So again, these are really great for grinding material down, and this is a grinding wheel, so that's that. Finally, we have a wire brush here. So like I said earlier, if you have a piece of metal that's got a whole bunch of paint on it, or if it's like particularly rusty and you need to get some of that off before you're welding it, then the wire brush tool is going to be really great for that. It does also work as a finishing tool as well, so if you're done with sanding disc and the flap wheel here, then this will be, flap disc here, then this is a nice finishing tool just to finish everything off and give you a nice consistent finish on your metalworking projects. So that's that. So some of the basics about the grinder itself, you'll notice here that this one has a safety attachment onto it. So here, if I have the cutoff disc on here, I'll probably be cutting along here, say, right? So all the sparks, if I didn't have this on here, would be sort of flying everywhere in the general direction. So this safety mechanism keeps all the sparks going downward, so they're not up in my face and they're not going all around the shop either. So if other people are working in the shop, it also keeps them safe too. So any good grinder will come with that safety attachment. And generally speaking, you should always have it on there. There might be an instance where this might get in the way and you have to take it off, but in that case, I would definitely wear a face shield, or at least be aware that you don't have that safety attachment on there. And you also notice how I'm using it. So for me, what I've come to really like doing is sort of think of this as an extension of my arm. So if I'm using it just with one hand, so typically you can have two hands on here. So one hand on the trigger and your other hand up top over this handle here, which is really convenient. But in some cases, if you're only using it with one hand, it's nice to have this sort of supported on your arm like that. And then you could just sort of use it just like you would like a saw or something, right? So this is just an extension of your arm that way. So really great way about using it. To switch out these attachments, there's a little button back here which disengages the arbor that's on here. So it sort of locks it into place. And then chuck key here, so I can remove the chuck off of here. Take this off. Then I can switch it out to this guy here, right? So it has the same arbor diameter here, so it'll fit on there just fine. You'll notice too that these nuts have different shapes to them. So this top one here usually has the holes in it, so that will be that one that goes right over top, so you can unlock it or lock it up whenever with the chuck key. So that's the top one here. And this bottom one, there's a sort of a circular part on the bottom, and it's got sort of squared off edges on it. So that meets up with the bottom part of this arbor here, which also has squared off edges on it. So that'll engage it, and that'll keep it from wanting to loosen up on that arbor while you're using it. So you could just set that up here and just spin it in place until it locks in place. So it keeps that grinding disc or sanding disc or whatever in place. So that's pretty much that. So I can take this, I'll put my cutting disc back on there. And I can hand tighten this just in the beginning. And once it's hand tightened, I can push this button back in, engage it again, and then just lock it back up until it's nice, good, hand tight. So this just gives you a little bit more leverage. All right, that's pretty much angle grinders.